John Moon is a lesson in resiliency, perseverance, and determination. Those are the three words that I'd like people to define me as. Someone that's resilient, that perseveres, and is very determined to accomplish whatever goal that sets before him. And that's my own personal legacy. And I got that from a combination of things, from working at Freedom House and from my growing up, my young childhood. So if you read the book American Sirens, you'll find out. But it was all ordained. It was going to happen anyway. And there was nothing I was ever going to be able to do about it. It was the only thing that it did was to make me more resilient, was able to persevere, and make me more determined to accomplish whatever goal that you set for.
To illuminate the often unseen mental health challenges faced by first responders, police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and 911 dispatchers, by sharing their stories, fostering understanding, and promoting resources for support and healing. We aim to break down stigma, advocate for improved mental health services within the first responder community, and inspire hope and resilience. This is the Weight We Carry podcast.
What's going on, guys? It's Bart and Brittany from the Weight We Carry podcast. And today we are absolutely honored to have Mr. John Moon from Freedom House and City of Pittsburgh EMS. Mr. Moon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I appreciate the opportunity to be speaking with you both.
Well, thank you very much. And if you would, sir, I know most of our viewers are going to know who you are, but if you could give them a little further information on what you've done and where we go in the future with EMS.
Yes. John Moon, I was one of the Freedom House paramedics prior to moving in with the City of Pittsburgh Emergency Medical Services. I started at Freedom House in 1972. And it was interesting because my plot there was kind of unique. I was an orderly at the hospital, and two of Freedom House's paramedics came into a room because they were doing inter-hospital transports, and I happened to be in the room that they came into, and it was something about these two gentlemen that commanded the attention of that room. They really didn't have to say anything. Their mere presence just commanded everybody's attention. They had white uniforms on, and they had afros and beards, which was the style back then, and so did I. And I just couldn't take my eyes off of them. They had a radio that was mumbling something that I couldn't make heads or tail out of. And I happened to see a patch on their uniform that said Freedom House Ambulance. And it's interesting because they left. I didn't say anything to them. And something triggered my mind that said, wow, why can't I do that? And in my mind, I'm a hospital orderly for about 5 or 6 years. I've bathed patients. I've transported them from rooms to therapy and bathed them, made beds, put in Foley catheters. How difficult could that job be? So they had left, and I kind of did something that very few people can identify with, is I went to the yellow pages of the phone book, and I found out where Freedom House's offices were located, which was directly across from where I worked at Montefiore to Presbyterian, which is UPMC now. And I went there during my lunch hour, and I was beaming with confidence. And I walked into the office there, and I told the gentleman, I said, I'm here to apply for a job. And he said, oh, great. He said, if I showed you a picture of the heart, would you be able to label the circulatory system? No. Okay, if I showed you a picture of the lungs, would you be able to label the respiratory system? No. He said, okay, you're not qualified to work here. And when he said that, I often think about that, because what he did at that time is he unleashed a series of motivating factors that I didn't know I had. And I said, oh, no, he didn't tell me that. And so that little voice in the back of my mind said, "Okay, John, this is what you wanted to do, so it's up to you to find out how to do it." And I left there and I went back to the Yellow Pages and I found an EMT course that was at the North Park Fire Academy. And I went there for about 13 weeks, twice a week, and completed the course and got my little patch and went back to Freedom House 3 months later and got hired on the spot. And I left their offices and went down to the uniform store and got those crisp white uniforms that I admired from these two guys. And believe it or not, what I didn't know at that time is I found my calling, and I never looked back from that point on. And it was interesting because I still had the job at Montefiore Hospital as an orderly. And so once I got hired by Freedom House, I worked 7 to 3 at Montefiore and 4 to 12 at Freedom House. And I did that for 16 hours a day for about 2 years. I was a lot younger then. And once I fell in love with working at Freedom House, I resigned my orderly position and worked full time on the 4 to 12 shift at Freedom House. And that was really the beginning of my EMS career that I never thought was just out there waiting for me. And I, look forward to coming to work every day. I got into a mindset that I was looking, could hardly wait for that life-threatening call. That may sound strange, but that's what I look forward to. And it was amazing because it presented a challenge to me to try to correct or undo whatever that medical crisis was at that particular time. And it was something that Dr. Nancy Caroline uh, kept building up a level of confidence in each and every one of us uh, about how to treat different patients with different situations and things like that. And it's interesting because at Freedom House, we weren't looking to set the standard or become the foundation of every EMS system in this country. We were caught up in the moment, providing a much needed service to this neglected, underserved community. And I say that because oftentimes people don't know how we began, and they can't imagine uh, it not being in paramedic service. So to get a clear picture of that, I have to take you back in history. And we'll go back quite a number of years to the early 60s, which I don't believe either you were born during that time.
Not
Uh,
quite.
and during that time, it was during the civil rights era. So there was a lot of protest across the country, and as well as here in Pittsburgh, about equality and opportunities, and racism was at an all-time high during that time. And there was a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but there was rioting going on in various cities across the country. And the federal government at that particular time kind of stepped up to say, well, let's see what we can do to combat all of these racial inequities or inequalities and things like that. So they started sending federal dollars into various neighborhoods across the country. And during that time, Freedom House Enterprise Incorporated, which was started by a gentleman by the name of James McCoy, uh, it was a recipient of some of that funding. And it's interesting because Freedom House Enterprise, its primary goal at that time was voter registration and job training and job placement. And that was even a mini food bank uh, in this community. And what made it interesting is that the community, the primary way you got to the emergency room was in the back of a police wagon. And if you can imagine a police wagon coming up to your residence and two white officers escorting you to the back because there was no such thing as diversity, equity, and inclusion. There was no such thing as police accountability. And so you would call a 7-digit number because there was no 911 system. And you would give the police dispatcher your information, and the police dispatcher would send a unit to your residence. Now, in the perfect world, that was okay. Uh, but in the Hill District, it was rather unique because this community, which I grew up in, had what I would call an adversarial relationship with law enforcement. They didn't like the community, and the community didn't trust them. So you would call, and the police, they determined when they wanted to come, how long it wanted to take them to get there, or whether they wanted to transport you to the emergency room or not. And that was what this community was plagued with. And oftentimes, you know, they would put you in the back of a police wagon, and both officers would get up front, and away you would go to the emergency room. And if something happened to you back there, you stopped breathing or your heart stopped beating, there was no one back there to help you. And that was the norm, not only in the Hill District, but across the country at that time. So you have this organization. It's interesting because it was a storefront organization. And um, one of the issues that they tackled was food delivery to this residents of this underserved community. And it had a board of directors, which consisted of uh, influential people from different foundations and different attorneys and things like that. And one of the foundation members, a gentleman by the name of Phil Howland, who was president of the Maurice Falk Medical Fund at that time, he came up with a vision and he said, if this community can deliver food to the residents of this underserved community, why can't they deliver medical care? And but he didn't know how to get his vision into operation. So he approached Presbyterian Hospital at the time, and they put him in contact with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Peter Saffer. Now, the interesting thing about Dr. Saffer, he was a visionary in his own right. It was his vision. It wasn't how fast you got that person to the emergency room that determined the outcome, but what was being done for them before they got there. But no one believed him. He'd done all types of research and things of that nature, and he invented CPR and how to breathe for people and things. But the medical community kind of turned their backs on him. The political community wouldn't allow him to put his vision in operation. So up comes this organization with the need for this underserved, neglected community, and Dr. Saffer saw an opportunity to get his vision out to the world. And Freedom House said, we want to improve medical care in our community because we can't rely on the police. We can't get a cab to come. We had residents that can't get back and forth to their doctor's appointments. So we're sort of held captive. The political powers could care less about this community. So what can you do? And he saw an opportunity there. And Freedom House said, okay, if you would train the members of this community, we got one request. And it was a requirement. Every person you train has to be Black. And he agreed to that. So Dr. Saffer takes 25 Black men at that time, myself included, and he put us through the most intense training that had ever been done anywhere in this country. We spent time in the emergency room, not observing, but treating patients. We spent time in intensive care units, the cardiac care unit. We also spent time in the county morgue, studying anatomy and physiology. In the animal lab, practicing on dogs and things of that nature. In the operating room, you are looking at and talking to the very first person in this country to do a tracheal intubation in the field. It had never been done before. I am also the very first person with a high school education at that time to go into an operating room to intubate an anesthetized, unconscious, non-breathing patient. Obviously, that had never been done either because
Wow.
it was reserved for physicians and medical students and anesthesiologists and things and that was a challenge. And it's interesting because I oftentimes look back at that, and we had done all this training using mannequins and practicing on animals, and um, I was summoned to meet Dr. Saffer at the operating room because he was chairman of the Department of Anesthesiology as well as the Department of Critical Care Medicine. And they didn't tell me why I was coming there. So I showed up to meet him, and they started putting me in all this operating room attire, the hat and the shoe covers and the mask and things. And they, he escorted me to the operating room, and he opened the door, and everything stopped. The OR technician stopped what they were doing, and the surgeon who was preparing to operate on the patient stopped what they were doing. The anesthesiologist who was at the head of the anesthetized, non-breathing patient stopped what they were doing, and they had amphitheaters then, so you had medical students looking down, uh, and everyone was watching me. And what I discovered later on is the reason everything stopped in that operating room and it became so quiet you could hear a pin drop is that the only time someone that looked like me entered an operating room was with a mop or a bucket. But I didn't have that. So Dr. Saffer walks over to the anesthesiologist and said, "Get up. You sit down and intubate that patient." And at the time, I knew all these people were watching, but I didn't see them. So I intubated the patient successfully on the very first try. And from that point on, during the course of that day, we went around from room to room intubating unsuspecting patients. Little did
Wow.
I know, less than a week later, I would take that skill from the operating room out into the field to treat an unconscious patient. And
Wow.
it's unique because um, we grew accustomed to challenges, and it was almost like a day-to-day basis. And we received a call for an unconscious patient, and we arrived at the person's home, and he was unconscious, but he was still breathing. And we called Dr. Nancy Caroline and said, "We have this 80-year-old male who's having trouble breathing, and he's unconscious. He has a medical history of COPD." And she said, "Intubate the patient and start an IV on him." And at that time, I thought she had lost her mind. I said, "Will you repeat that?" She says, "Yes, intubate that patient and start an IV on him." So my partner set up all the equipment and stuff, and I intubated successfully on the very first try. And we quickly got the patient to the emergency room and transported them to Montefiore Hospital. Now, in
Wow.
my mind, I just performed this procedure, big deal. Get into the operating room, the emergency room at Montefiore, and I got challenged by the ER doctor at that time. "Who did this?" I said, "I did." "And who are you?" I said, "I'm John Moon, and I work for Freedom House Ambulance Service." "Well, who told you to do it?" "Dr. Nancy Caroline, our medical director." And fortunately for us, doing our clinical rotations at the various hospitals, there was a nurse there that said, "Oh, they're allowed to do that now." So Dr. Nancy Caroline called the hospital to confirm that the intubation was successful, and when she got that, she was overjoyed. And okay, what's the big deal? We're trying to do this, and so we constantly were inundated with different challenges, and so being the very first person to take that skill out of the operating room, it's interesting because failure was not an option. Had I failed that procedure, there's a great chance that paramedics would not be doing it today because we were writing the very first paramedic training manual, Emergency Care in the Streets, that every paramedic in the United States was required to read to become a paramedic in this country.
Yep.
So we operated in the Hill District and Oakland, and um, the city of Pittsburgh discovered the sophisticated service operating in this underserved community. Uh, so they entered into a contract with Freedom House to provide pre-hospital care to the downtown business district. And um, so every year around January, we'd get a check for about $25,000, and that went toward payroll and vehicle maintenance and supplies and things like that. Keep that in mind. So during our time, a constant challenges day after day. We had to teach the community that whenever a Freedom House vehicle showed up, expect that paramedic to come in with an oxygen tank and a heart monitor and take your blood pressure and start an IV on you and give you medication. They were accustomed to being placed in the back of a police vehicle. So when we arrived, there's the skepticism was there. Why are you playing around with my loved one? Why don't you just get them out of here and take them to the hospital? If something happens to them, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So we had to teach the community that we were bringing the emergency room to them. Okay, once we accomplished that goal, we also had to teach the emergency rooms because they were not accustomed to someone that looked like me coming in, walking up to a nurse and saying, I have a 25-year-old male that suffered a syncopal episode while at work. His lung sounds are clear. I put him on the heart monitor. He has a tachybrachial rhythm. His blood pressure is 120/80. I've started an IV of lactated ringers. He has no real pertinent past history. And here he is. They bust out laughing.
Yeah.
So we got offended by that. And and I'm speaking from a personal standpoint because when I did that, I went back to Dr. Nancy Caroline and I said, I don't even know why we're doing this. She didn't even listen to me. She laughed at me. Why are we learning all of this? And she politely said, if you don't learn to speak the language of the emergency room, then no one will ever listen to you. Go back in there and find a physician. So I went back into the emergency room, uh, AGH, and found a doctor and repeated the same scenario. And it was received a lot better because I was speaking his own language that he was accustomed to dealing with. And once we were able to accomplish those particular goals, um, we come on, what's the next challenge? We discovered one day that we were only allowed to handle calls in the Hill District. And we discovered that the police were not giving us a call that we should have been getting in the Hill District in our own community. And once we discovered that, we have to come up with a reason to offset that. So, believe it or not, we bought a police scanner and we monitored police calls. And whenever a call came in the Hill District for a particular patient that we should have gotten the call, we self-dispatched and oftentimes beat the police on the scene, treated the patient, and passed the police on the way to the hospital while they were going to the patient's home. So uh, we handle day-to-day challenges on a continuous basis. And really, when I think about Freedom House, we became victims of our own success. And by that, I simply mean um, I was working one day and we heard a call for a child struck by a Port Authority bus in Squirrel Hill on Murray Avenue. Police arrived on the scene and it was such a traumatic injury that they didn't know what to do. They panicked and they got on the radio and said, can you send Freedom House out here? And the dispatcher said, no, I can't send them because it's not their district. we were accustomed to monitoring police radio, so we heard that call. And we self-dispatched, arrived on the scene, treated the patient, obviously saved the child's life, and transported him to the hospital. But what we didn't know at that time is the community saw that. And they voiced their concerns to the political powers to be, at that particular time, the mayor. How dare you allow those people over there in that public housing, welfare recipient, rundown community have better medical care than I do. I voted for you. I contributed to your campaign. You better do something. So the mayor at that time was running for reelection. And the common sense approach is that he had to bow to the wishes of his constituents. So the common sense approach is you already have this ultra-modern system. Why not expand it into the rest of the city? Instead of that, he decided to create his own EMS system. And there was no room in it for an entity such as Freedom House. But he just couldn't get rid of us. So he came up with what I would call a very strategic way of trying to do that. We get a call to our administration, get a call one day to go visit the mayor. And in our mind, we're saying, wow, the mayor is calling us down and we're going to expand Freedom House to the rest of the city. So we took a plan on where you could station an EMS unit everywhere throughout the city of Pittsburgh. And we took this plan down to the mayor and said, we got this plan, Mayor, on where you can put all these units. He said, okay, give it to me. I'll give it to my director. And he put it on his desk. And the reason I called you down here is that your sirens are making too much noise. Can you put a bell or something on that truck? You mean like an ice cream truck? So he issued an executive order that whenever Freedom House went on a call to the downtown business district, we were not allowed to use our sirens. So we would get a call for a person unconscious in the middle of Fifth Avenue and Smithfield Street, and we would go to the light and wait for it to change and go to the next light and wait for it to change. And that impacted our response times. All the while behind the scenes, he's creating his own EMS system. Remember, I said we had a contract. January 1st every year, or January sometime doing that, we would get a check from the city that went toward payroll and supplies and vehicle maintenance. January of 1975, we expecting a check for $25,000, which was a lot of money at that time, and we get a check for $5,000. February, we didn't get anything. March, we got another check for $5,000. What that did is that forced us to reach out to different foundations and other organizations for grants to stay afloat. And all while behind the scenes, Pittsburgh EMS is getting brand new vehicles and ultra up-to-date equipment, and Freedom House is struggling to keep itself above ground. And we got to a point where we had to make a decision. Do we continue to struggle on day-to-day operations and reach out to different foundations and things? And we were built on what I would call fiscal quicksand, a grant here and a donation there and stuff. And it became a problem. So we had to make a decision. Do we continue to struggle, or do we die a dignified death and turn everything over to the city of Pittsburgh? And we chose to do that. October 1975, we entered into an agreement with the city of Pittsburgh that we would cease operations. The city of Pittsburgh would take all the equipment, the vehicles, the personnel. We would not have to go through any additional training because we were already trained by the best, and it was supposed to be a smooth transition. November 3rd of 1975, we reported to work with the city of Pittsburgh Emergency Medical Services, only to discover that we were not welcomed nor wanted. Um, we entered into a uh, system that I would call a survival of the fittest. We had a written agreement that it was supposed to be a smooth transition. It turned out to be very traumatic. We are were retrained into a system that we're using skills and knowledge that we're not accustomed to, that we were not part of the standards that we had set. Um, our personnel we were not allowed to do anything. Uh, Last minute shift changes and things. So what we didn't know at that time is Pittsburgh Emergency Medical Services went on a systematic elimination process to get rid of all of Freedom House's people. And it was very, very successful. 30 of the 35 people that came over were terminated. Or either they said, look, I don't need to deal with this. This is too much for me. I can't deal with this last minute shift changes. You won't let me do anything. I'm out of here. 5 people were left, and I happened to be one of the 5 that survived the onslaught. Despite the fact that I was the very first person in the nation to do a tracheal intubation in the field, I'd been trained by Dr. Nancy Caroline and Dr. Peter Saffer. I was relegated to the role of an observer. I couldn't drive the vehicle, couldn't talk on the radio, couldn't examine patients. All I could do was just sit there, all in an attempt to frustrate me to say, okay, y'all got this. I'm out of here. As fate would have it, one day, the crew that I was with, even though I can't do anything, we went on a call to a person's home, and we walked in, and the person was unconscious, not breathing, didn't have a heartbeat. And the crew that I was working with, they panicked. They didn't know what to do. So they looked at the person that wasn't allowed to do anything and say, you take over. So I said, okay, well, you start the IV, you put the person on the monitor, I do a trach intubation, and that's great. And we subsequently saved the person's life, and that's wonderful. But it had to be kept quiet because I wasn't allowed to do anything. And that put the responsibility back on me. Do I continue to remain this quiet, unnoticeable person, or do I step up my game and become more outspoken? And I chose to do the latter. I chose to make sure that the city of Pittsburgh knew exactly who John Moon was. And I did that by challenging the department on its treatment of patients. The paramedics, unfortunately, at that time were trained that people that looked like me did not have heart attacks and strokes. So whenever they went to a public housing complex, they refused to go in without police assistance because that's the only call you're going to get there is a shooting, a drug overdose, or domestic violence. So I have to have this protection. The vehicles had handcuffs on them. They had 7-cell flashlights, uh, not to find your way around in the dark, but to use as a weapon because I'm in this dangerous community. You can never tell what happened. The makeup of Pittsburgh EMS at that time was an all-white EMS organization from the suburbs. So the personnel came in with preconceived ideas on what it would be like coming into an urban environment from a suburban environment. And they brought with them guns and knives and things of that nature. So I became the troublemaker. I started challenging the department on the treatment of African Americans. I challenged the department on the equipment that it had. Um, and I subsequently got the handcuffs taken off the vehicles and the flashlights removed. And the department started knowing who John Moon was. And as a result of that, I started getting promoted from a paramedic to a crew chief and to a supervisor. And I noticed that as I'm going up to the ranks, the department had not hired anyone to look like me. Pittsburgh EMS, unfortunately, went 10 years without hiring an African American. So Mr. Troublemaker challenged the department on its hiring process. So, okay, that's your problem. Then you have to come up with a solution for it. So I designed the very first diversity recruitment program in the history, obviously, of the city of Pittsburgh, but in the history of Pittsburgh EMS. And I used the same format that we used at Freedom House. We went out into the community and recruited people that didn't have any idea what a paramedic was or an EMT was, and never seen one, talked to one, put them into a training program, got the city to pay them a salary while they went through the training. And once they would complete their training, it was just a lateral move because they were guaranteed employment because the department had invested into this individual. And that was the normal way that Pittsburgh EMS hired, all while I was there. That was never an all-white class, and it was always racially balanced because that became my responsibility. And John Moon is chronically getting promoted, and I became the one that handled day-to-day operations in the city of Pittsburgh. Everything went across my desk: promotions, terminations, hirings, um, day-to-day operations, complaints. Um, I had 10 field supervisors that I was responsible for. So John Moon ran Pittsburgh EMS for about 12, 15 years. And what I didn't notice at that time is that I'm making all these changes and challenging the department. I was sabotaging my own career. And Pittsburgh EMS had what we call a next man up promotional process, meaning that if I'm the chief supervisor, a position of assistant chief became available, I would automatically get that because I had all this knowledge and experience and things like that. And it's a promotional process from an administrative level that Pittsburgh EMS used for 30 years until it was time for John Moon to be promoted to the assistant chief position. I got passed over by a white male that I had been his boss for 15 years. Not only that, I was ordered to teach him my job duties and responsibilities, which made him eligible for the next position. So I was relegated to the role of teaching CPR and handling complaints. That's all I could do because all of my job duties and responsibilities was given to this gentleman. So I challenged Pittsburgh EMS on its promotional process, and I was given what I would call a token position of an assistant chief. So Pittsburgh EMS at that time had two assistant chiefs, myself and the male that got promoted above me. He was making $8,000 a year more than I was. So he got the pay raise and I just got the title. And so, you know, I'm struggling to keep my head above water. Um, and then another promotion comes available to the deputy chief position. Who do you think got it? The gentleman that had taken all of my duties and responsibilities. So I
Yep.
challenged the department again. And they said, well, he has all these duties and responsibilities that he could put on his resume. You can't do that because you don't do those things. So I filed a racial discrimination lawsuit against the department. And you don't sue your employer and expect to live a happy life. And subsequently, Pittsburgh EMS, unfortunately, at that time, made my life a living hell to the point where it was problematic to come to work on a day-to-day basis. I was ostracized, not to mention relegated to the role of teaching CPR and handling complaints. The 10 supervisors that I was primarily responsible for, I got ostracized by them. They were not allowed to even come into my office. And so it put me in a position where I had to make another decision. Do I stay here and show you how tough I am, or do I cut my losses and move on? And I chose to retire from Pittsburgh EMS in 2009 after 34 years. Um, I leave, and then I had a couple of days of reckoning. I had to accept the fact that no matter how good I was, what I created and what I designed, I was never going to be promoted up to the position of chief of Pittsburgh EMS because I'm no different than the average person. I work hard and I do good, and I expect to be promoted if they become available. That was never going to happen because the department at that time was designed to prevent that from happening. So I'm off living a retired life, and I had to accept another reckoning. The fact that that wasn't why I was there. I wasn't there to rise up through the ranks and one day run the city of Pittsburgh. That wasn't my job. I was there to open doors and break down hurdles and barriers that when people that looked like me came after me, that they would have an opportunity to get into that department. So I've accepted that. Unbeknownst to me at that time, the city of Pittsburgh elects its first African American mayor in the city's history, who was a gentleman that Mayor Ed Gainey, that I had worked with personally doing my diversity recruitment program. So he knew of the challenges and the hurdles and things that I had to deal with. And he comes in, he looks at Pittsburgh EMS, and he sees the present chief, a white male. It had always been a white male. And he tells him, "You need to retire. We're going in a different direction." So the chief at that time retires, and he hires or promotes appoints the very first African American chief in the 50-year history of Pittsburgh EMS, an African American female. And the irony of it is she's someone that I hired doing my diversity recruitment program. So I'm no longer there, but my legacy still lives through her. So she comes in and creates a Freedom House EMT Academy right inside the department. And she uses the same format that I used when I was running my diversity recruitment program. She went out into the community, recruited people, and placed them into an EMT training program and got them a salary and guaranteed them employment. And she has a 100% success rate in them passing the National Registry exam. None of her students have ever failed it. So the legacy of Freedom House still lives in Pittsburgh EMS. And as if you ever get an opportunity to go into her office, there's this huge sign in the back of her office on the board, on the wall, that says Freedom House Ambulance Service 1967 to 1975. Um, all the EMT units have Freedom House's emblems on the side of it. And the irony of that is I lobbied city council when I was there to put them on the paramedics units. But, you
Mm,
get new units, the trucks break down and wear and tear. So the majority of them are gone. So right now there's a push going on to get those units put back on there. So John Moon right now is still living a happily retired life. But I want people to understand is I'm not this disgruntled, retired former assistant chief of Pittsburgh EMS. I love the department. I love the people that work there, and it will always have a special place in my heart. But we're talking about different times now. So my goal is to keep the legacy of Freedom House alive, and I've committed the remaining part of my retirement to doing that. That's the
rightfully so.
version.
It's
So
amazing.
that's the legacy of Freedom House.
That is absolutely amazing. And, you know, coming in so late to EMS for me, I didn't start into EMS until my 30s.
Mhm.
And not knowing the background of Freedom House at the time. And, obviously, working in EMS for 12 years and emergency services for nearly 20,
Yes.
I've gotten to know a lot more about it. And now we're sitting here with the true trailblazer of it right here to get this story out there.
Yes.
Um, It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing to be able to hear that type of story and the trials and tribulations that you yourself had to go through to be the retired paramedic that you are now, you know?
Yes, yes.
Um, it's an amazing thing. I don't even know what else to say.
Yeah, I'm speechless. Just
I'm speechless. But we do have a few questions. I think you covered most of it.
Yes.
Um, but when people introduce you as a pioneer of modern EMS, what does that feel like to you? How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel rejuvenated, believe it or not. But one of the things that I'd like to point out is this is not necessarily about me as an individual so much as it is about an organization of a group of what I would call visionaries, which were the board of directors of Freedom House, who saw a need in a underserved, somewhat neglected community. And they took that need to another visionary, Dr. Peter Saffer, who saw an opportunity to get his vision out to the world. And he gave that vision to a group of who I would call creative change makers, which are the paramedics that worked at Freedom House Ambulance Service. And so um, it's an opportunity of a lifetime to be traveling around the country, speaking about Freedom House, and I'm very honored to do that. But my goal is to sell the organization as a whole rather than the individual. And even though this gives me a platform, I'm just the platform or the template uh, that's doing that.
So humble in your history there. But what would you wish that people would further understand more about the people that built Freedom House?
Um, we were a group of creative change makers. Uh, we were a group that, whether it disappointments and broken promises and setbacks and frustrations, to create a system that people take for granted today, that's glorified on television. That's the legacy of Freedom House. It's my goal right now to make sure, and I would love to see the history of EMS taught in every EMT program, every paramedic training program, every EMS physician's training program, because that's a specialty now. And it all was created with the foundation of Freedom House Ambulance Service. So that's my mindset um, in making sure that this legacy remains alive.
And do you obviously you remember the first field intubation? Um, like you said, before that, when you were in the theater in the operating room, and you have all these people watching you, and I'm sure time stood still. But what a I couldn't imagine being in that position and you coming in, like you said, and people don't expect you to come in holding a laryngoscope. They're having a mop bucket instead. I could, that's it's not my place at all. But looking back on that today and to see where you you took the city of Pittsburgh and the quality portion of that, how does that really truly make you feel?
Really proud and honored. Um, it's a testament to uh, Dr. Peter Saffer, who didn't mind pushing the envelopes uh, to get his vision out to the world. Uh, and it's an honor to have been part of his legacy, um, as well as Dr. Nancy Caroline's, um, who um, stepped out of her comfort zone. If you can imagine a 5'2" Jewish woman walking through the halls of a hospital with four black guys with afros and beards, walking into an intensive care unit, not saying we're here, but just walking up to a patient's bedside and saying, "What's the chief complaint? What's the medication? Tell me the EKG reading. What's the patient's prognosis?" Constantly challenging us on how to be better in treating critically ill patients. And once we were able to get her confidence, there was nothing she wouldn't tell us to do, and there was no place that we wouldn't take her. If you could imagine her going into the Hill District, into some of the most desolate, rundown, debilitated buildings, uh, and just being a part of a team trying to save the individual's life. Uh, and it's interesting because the example I like to use is Narcan is this wonder drug nowadays. Everybody has it. Vending machines on the street. But what people don't realize is we administered Narcan back in 1973. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, it's not this wonder drug that uh, people seem to think it is. But since nobody knows about Freedom House and the things that we pioneered, it could get all the credit and accolades that it does now. Uh, I look back at Freedom House and I say we were so far ahead of our time that it boggles my mind today. And I worked there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our overdose patients never woke up in our vehicles. That may sound strange. We didn't want them to wake up. So because we knew uh, once we administered Narcan and you woke up, you become combative, want to get out of the vehicle or attack the person because I just ruined your $25 high. So I kind of titrated it, the administration of Narcan, and kept you in a confused, unconscious, dazed state, and I monitor your respirations. If you stop
Yeah.
breathing, big deal. I could handle that until I could get you into the emergency room in a more stable, secure environment. And that was by design. Unfortunately, nowadays, the goal is to just push it right away and wait for the
Wake them
person to
up.
wake up and stuff. No, we didn't want them to wake up because I knew you were a threat once you woke up. And so it's those types of things that, like I say, just boggles my mind as to what we were doing at that particular time that nobody else in the country were doing. I mean, no one.
Yeah.
So Bart and I started this podcast with our own mission to talk about the weight of a call. So for many responders, the emotional weight of the job can be heavy. What helped you carry the weight over all these years?
Well, I look at hurdles and challenges that we encountered back then, that I encountered with the city of Pittsburgh, that I encounter in my daily life. Instead of using them as stumbling blocks or hurdles or barriers, I use them to motivate me. So the more hurdles I encounter, the more motivated I become. And the best example I can give you, and that's a great question, is that doing my diversity recruitment program, I encountered all types of challenges and pushbacks and things. It got so bad that racist statement was carved on the bathroom walls of the emergency rooms, and we had to have security go in there and check whenever a Pittsburgh EMS unit stopped by to make sure that there were no statements written on the walls and things like that. Um, and every time I had a pushback, it just motivated me to try even harder because failure was not an option with the students that I put into my program. They were not going to fail. I was not going to allow them to fail because I wasn't going to allow anyone to say, "I told you so." So failure was not an option with them. They didn't know it at the time, but whatever it took to get them through that program, I was willing to do. As the best example I can give you, we had single mothers uh, there. And if they had to do an internship at a particular hospital, I set it up where they would drop their child off at my house. And I would come by and watch their child while they were doing the clinical rotations, whether it was, in the ER or wherever it was. And then once they're done, they come back and pick up their children from the house and take them home. Nobody knew that because I was still on duty at the time. That was something that that we had incorporated into this program that no one knew about.
It was the no matter what attitude. No
Yeah,
matter what, we're gonna make you get through this
absolutely.
training.
Yeah, failure was not an option.
Now, if you could, and this is like probably to newer people that are trying to get into EMS or anything along those lines, what qualities do you believe make a great paramedic or first responder in your eyes?
One of the things that I utilized when I was a paramedic in the field, even after I got to the rank of a field supervisor, I enjoyed going on calls, and I always wanted to be the first person there, even as a supervisor. Um, the one thing that I took with me that every call I went on, whenever I entered that person's home, I was treating a member of my family. So if I'm looking at you as if you're a member of my family, I can't help but give you the best possible care that you could get. Or what if it was me lying there on the floor or suffering some medical issue and think, how would I want somebody to treat me? So my mindset was, okay, you're a member of my family. So you're going to get the very best possible care that I can give you. And that was the mindset that I took with me all while I was there.
I think that's the only way.
Yeah.
I think that's
Mhm.
the only way.
So we have a 12-year-old that already has his mindset that he wants to be a firefighter and a paramedic. So I absolutely love asking this question. What
Okay.
advice would you give young people who want to start a path in public safety or EMS?
Try to obviously bring the best you that you can to the job because you're going to encounter different hurdles and barriers and obstacles and be prepared for those. But like I mentioned earlier, instead of using them as reasons or excuses or whatever, use them to motivate you. And that's even today, I use that as my day-to-day uh, mindset. I may try and work. I may fix something at home and I can't get it done right away. I may put it down for a day or so, or a minute or an hour, but I have to come back to it because I'm motivated. I can't let this overcome me. So any challenge or hurdle, I use that to motivate me to try even harder to accomplish that goal. And right now, I don't. It may sound strange, but I don't know how to quit. I just don't know how to do that, and I haven't found anyone to teach me. So, so
We
not
need
that I'm
more of that
looking,
Yeah.
but
nowadays.
yeah,
We need more of
The
that.
world needs.
yeah, yeah.
Let's see. So when people learn about Freedom House for the first time, what do you hope they take away from that history?
One of the things that I have to look back on is that we at Freedom House, uh, we handled day-to-day challenges almost daily, whether it was the police cussing you out or a patient wouldn't allow you to touch them or put electrodes on them or take their blood pressure because of the color of your skin. Um, we grew accustomed to that. And the one thing that um, kind of saddens me is that very few people have heard or know about Freedom House. That's the one thing that saddens me. But I understand the reason why. Because unfortunately, the city of Pittsburgh wanted to eliminate any memory or evidence that there was any other EMS system prior to that. And you do that by getting rid of the people. So if you get rid of the history makers, you essentially get rid of that part of history that they made. So during that particular time, the goal was to eliminate the history makers, and it was very, very successful. But now, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of momentum behind bringing this part of history back into the forefront where it rightfully belongs. Um, 2 Emmy Award winning documentaries, uh, the book American Sirens, the Freedom House EMT Academy in the city of Pittsburgh. Outside of that, there's a Freedom House 2.0 that's sponsored by UPMC and the Mellon Foundation, and they go into underserved communities and bring people and put them into EMT training programs. That started in the Hill. It is now expanded to Erie and Harrisburg under the name of Freedom House.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to keep it going for you too. Even our small little
Please,
platform that we have here, we're going to do
please.
whatever we can to make sure your story is given the correct light.
Mhm.
So
And
I think we
you
do
know,
the one final question with that.
Go for it.
yes.
So, so when your story is told years from now, what do you hope people say about John Moon?
Well, John Moon is a lesson in resiliency, perseverance, and determination. Those are the 3 words that I'd like um, people to define me as: someone that's resilient, that perseveres, and is very determined to accomplish whatever goal that sets before him. And that's my own personal legacy, and I got that uh, from a combination of things, from working at Freedom House and from my growing up, uh, my young childhood. So if you read the book American Sirens, uh, you'll find out. But it was all ordained. It was going to happen anyway, and there was nothing I was ever going to be able to do about it. It was the only thing that um, it did was to make me more resilient, and I was able to persevere and make me more determined to accomplish whatever goal that you set forth.
Well,
Wow.
it was an absolute honor to talk to you. Thank you so much for everything you've done and for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, I'm just blown away. Like I said, I think I wanted to give you the time to have basically story time with Mr. John Moon because I was mesmerized the whole time.
Mhm.
Mesmerized the whole time, and we couldn't be more thankful and honored that you would even think about coming on our show to talk to us.
Yeah. But yeah, the pleasure was all mine. And one of the things that I look at is when I talk to people, I expect them to tell somebody, and then I expect that person to tell somebody, and it's a continuous process. You know,
The
it's all
domino effect, the snowball
absolutely.
effect.
Hmm. Yes,
And that's what we
that's
want to do.
Yep.
That's what we want to do for you. We want to make sure that Freedom House story is put out there and people keep sharing it. We want to make sure that it gets the rightful credit it deserves, along with yourself.
yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. And we're neighbors, so we'll have to go catch up for a cup of coffee soon and
Absolutely.
continue this talk. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm in town.
Sounds great.
Sure, you're a
Yeah.
busy man.
Yes. You all know how to get in touch with me now, so don't hesitate.
Yes, sir.
To do it, okay?
Thank you.
Mr. Moon, we thank you so much. Everyone, again, please, whatever you need to do to research Freedom House, go to Wikipedia, whatever you need to do to check it out and find the history of EMS as a former EMT and former EMTs and firefighters. It all began here, and we are just so thankful for Freedom House and Mr. Moon to to be the trailblazers. That's what it is.
Thank you.
Again,
That's
thank you
what.
so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Mr. John Moon, everyone, you guys have a good day. And if you could stick around with us for 1 minute, we'll get finished up here. And thank you again.
Thank you.